One.
Your call is being connected.
Hey, I'm in my whole 150. So the display stopped working for some reason. So I'm trying HDMI 3 now. I'm in my whole 150. So the display stopped working. All right. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. We're starting. So, okay. So today I want to, by the way, no quiz today. So chill. You're like an easy crowd. I can like cancel a quiz every day. So this is where we were on Wednesday. So to remind you, what we're trying to do is we're trying to write this kind of function login that would let us try any kind of combination of username and password, and then it's supposed to lock us out if the same user tries to incorrectly log in 3 times in a row. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, so we'll have our logging attempts. So we'll have better tools for this, by the way, pretty soon. But for now, the tools we have are lists, and we're just practicing with lists in some sense. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, okay, so here, login attempts 0. I'm good. Yeah, so HDMI 3 worked out. Yeah. So login attempts 0 is number of failed attempts by username 0, and so on, right? So, and then 1 would be Stangby, and login attempts 2 would be me. So the job of login is to keep track of how many unsuccessful attempts I had when I tried to log in. So this is what we're doing. So this function just checks whether the username matches the password. And if it does, then we're done, right? And then here we just return true because successful attempt, okay? There's gonna be one thing that we will need to do here, and there's a number of things that we'll need to fix. So where we ended up here is we're saying, is the username in usernames? And if it is, then obviously the login attempt was not successful. So that means that we got to add 1 to login attempts in the correct location. So usernames.index username is the location of username in the list usernames, right? So for example, username.index fluid would be 0, usernames.index Stangaby would be 1, and so on. Does that make sense? So that's what index does, is it finds the location of technically the first appearance of the argument in the list. Right, so we're saying, okay, so this looks kind of complicated, but it's not really much of anything if you do it step by step, right? So what is this? Well, that's the location, kind of where is username in the list usernames? Is it 0? Is it 1? Is it 2? And then we just go to either login attempt 0 or login attempts 1 or login attempts 2. And then we'll say, okay, plus equals 1. Why? Well, because we didn't return true, so it's a failed attempt. And now we check, is the username actually is in usernames? And if it is, then it's a failed attempt by a known user. Right? And that's the usual behavior, right? So like you try to log in with an invalid username, the system might let you do that for a long time. You try to log in with a particular username and your passwords are wrong, you're going to get locked out for that particular user. Right? So, okay. And now that we're here, okay, return false. So let's try this and then let's fix it as we go. So we've defined our global variables. And here in the main block, I'll try to use it. So I'll try to say login cluets, so not matrix, vector, right? So that would be incorrect. So that's supposed to print false. So let's try to run it. And now I'll just try to fix it as I go. So just to show you the process. So here I crashed. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, so shell postmortem to get to the line that crashed. So this is the line that crashed. And I'm looking at, okay, so on line 16, so username matches password missing 2 required positional arguments. So why is that? Well, that's because here, so missing arguments, so this is an argument, this is an argument. So the problem is I did not give it usernames and I did not give it passwords. So that's an easy fix. There is another bug that's not hard, not easy. So the errors are sometimes difficult to interpret, right? So it's like technically, I think in retrospect, you would see what it means. So it says missing 2 required positional arguments. So you don't probably know the word positional in this kind of sense. And then, but it says missing arguments. So you remember argument is the thing that you give to the function. So that should kind of suggest to you what it is. You can usually ask ChatGPT. It maybe is going to explain it a little bit, maybe wrongly. You might need to ask it a couple times before you get a good explanation, but that's an option now. So positional argument, I could just tell you. So positional argument is just the usual kind of argument. So the other option is named argument. We'll talk about it later. Positional argument just means that the reason Python knows that this is supposed to be the username is because that's the first thing that I give to the function. And the reason it knows this is supposed to be this is that it's the second thing. So that's where positional comes from. This is as opposed to named, where you can do something without making it so that it has to be first username, then password. So to be clear, you might say, well, obviously it's username. Well, not obviously. This is just a variable. It's just a name. It could be anything. In particular, you could change this to be password username. And now things are out of order. But if you just give this as Cluet and this is vector, Python will not complain, of course. Right? The point is, those are just names. In general, you don't want to mess about with this. So you want the variables to not confuse you. So I'll name this username rather than password. So, okay. So I think I fixed that. So I'll try to run it again. So now it says false. Does anyone see a bug in here just by looking? So actually, let's take a couple minutes, just kind of think about whether there is a bug. Oh, someone does. Yes. It is. Yeah. So like here it is. Yeah. Yeah. Locked out does not appear to be defined. That is true. So we want to define locked out maybe over here, right? So in fact, locked out in our case is username specific, right? So it shouldn't even be a thing. So really, instead of locked out, what we might do is we might ask, is logging attempts for the username greater or equal than 3? Okay, any other bugs? I see one. Yeah. Yeah.
If the username is not one of the usernames, then
That's right. So let's try. Well, it returns none, which is almost as good, but let's try it. So I'll do Cluet with 3 T's. And what happens is this. So it's an error. So let's see why Cluet with 3 T's give us an error. So I'm doing postmortem again. So this is where the problem arises, right? So here, again, kind of a little bit difficult to debug. So what I would usually do here is I would say, okay, I first need to compute the right-hand side. So in order to compute the full right-hand side, first I need to know the value of this. So I'll just check out the value of this. And in fact, if I try it, I get an error. What's the error? Well, the username. So the username is Cluet with an extra T. That's not an username. So it doesn't have an index. So at this point, I would say, okay, so that's a problem for this function, right? So if the username is not in the list of usernames, it definitely does not match it does not match anything because it's not even a valid username. So what I might do is I might just, before I do anything, I might just check, is username in usernames? And if it's not, then obviously it doesn't match anything. So I might as well just return false. So that's a usual pattern, right? So you first check, does it even make sense to do anything? And then once you pass the checks, then you can do the actual computation. Yes. That's an interesting question. So the reason is usernames and passwords are global variables. And it makes sense that they should be global in the same way that login attempts should be global, because they're not supposed to change. So you might ask, well, like, why then in the usernames matches password, I give usernames and passwords? And the answer is login is a function that's supposed to work with those usernames and those passwords. On the other hand, username matches password is kind of a generic kind of function. So it kind of makes sense that the generic function would take all four, but the login function, which works with login attempts, which is definitely global anyway, also works with global usernames and global passwords. Make sense? Yeah. I mean, you would just change the global usernames and the global passwords. So one thing to note here is that the usernames, the passwords, and the login attempts, they all are interconnected because there must be 3 entries in login attempts that corresponds to the 3 usernames, 3 passwords. So if you change usernames and passwords, that means that you also must be changing you also must be changing login attempts. Yeah, over there. Sorry, speak up, please. So if the username is not one of the usernames, it definitely doesn't match any password. Oh, it's not in the usernames. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, did you have a question? Okay, yeah, okay, that's answered. All right, let's see what Discord is saying. 3, okay. Cool. Try premium free for 7 days. Elevate your writing with advanced suggestions for tone, clarity, and much more. Cool. Okay. So that's like that. So let's try it again. All right, so that's the problem that you pointed out. So now it doesn't crash. However, it prints none. So none, if you remember, is the object that's returned by default by a function if nothing else is returned. So what does this suggest? It suggests that we are getting to the end of the function, so over here, and we're not getting anything. Right? So here it doesn't say return anything. So we didn't enter this clause and we didn't enter this clause. So we did not return anything. So at this point, I might say, okay, like I'll trace it. So I'll put the breakpoint here and I'll step in. And here I'll check, okay, first of all, like what should it be? So it should return false. It should return false, right? Because this doesn't match any password. So this one we should definitely skip. So we're here. And here we're saying if username is in usernames, then do whatever login attempts. But we forgot to do what happens if it's not. So that's why we're returning not, right? So right now, username is not in usernames because username is misspelled. So we're just going to skip over that and not return anything. So when you don't return anything, by default, it's none. So what I'll do now is I'll say, okay, so that means that here we need an else. And here will return false. So a thing that you'd observe here is you're saying, okay, if blah, 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 return false, else return false. Well, that just means that you're returning false either way. So if that's the situation, what you might do is you might just say, okay, so I'll just comment this out. And I'll just return false in general here. So inside the else, we'll have this if, and then I'll just say return false, because in both cases, you need to return false. Yes.
Don't we have to increment the login attempts counter even if the username is not in the book?
Not really, because there's no one to increment the user the login attempts for. Right?
But like generally,
Well, I mean, that's kind of like a design choice. Like, do you want to also log the person out if they're if it's like a general kind of unsuccessful login? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying for a particular person, if they're trying to give the incorrect password a bunch of times, we'll log them out. But for a generic kind of thing, we won't. So we can also separately count like generic incorrect login attempts. I'm just not doing that. All right. So, okay. And I'm not saying that that's how you should design the security system. Like there's lots of choices. All right. So let's see where that gets us. So I'll remove the breakpoint and I'll run it again. And now both of them are false. So the next thing I want to test, and always, so for project one, it happened that I like accidentally leaked kind of the test cases. You're welcome. Or not. I don't know if it's like good or not to have to debug all of those given that they were leaked. But anyways, in general, you want to just test all the things that you tried, right? So I'll try to log in incorrectly as myself 3 times. Well, first, let me try to do something correctly. So I'll log in with my correct password, which is this. I hope you copy it exactly. I think most websites would probably not accept it. So what is it? 8 characters? Well, 8 characters is decent. I have like capitals, I have digits. No, it might be good. Okay, so let's see if that works out. Does not work out. So again, I'll do postmortem here. And like, I hope you see how useful it is to do the postmortem because you get to exactly the line that caused the problem and you can try all the values. So what's going on here? So if I try to run username matches password, that is true. And then here I said login attempts username, but really I meant usernames index username. Right? Because I want like 0, 1, or 2. So, okay. So I fixed that. So now this is true. And now this is supposed to be false. And this is supposed to be false. And then I want to check first if I can actually log in with the correct password. Now that I've incorrectly logged in twice, that's fine. And now you'll notice that if I log in again with the incorrect password, that would be false. And then if I try to do this, I'm now logged out. And that's because it never resets the counter for incorrect login attempts, right? So it only ever increases it. But if I log in correctly, it doesn't say, oh, you're good now. So so it's a design choice, but we might like to do that, right? So we might like to say login attempts like this is 0 if you successfully logged in. So now it's going to be that, okay, this is true and this works out. And now I just want to try logging in 3 times incorrectly. So that's supposed to lock me out. So I'll now try to log in as myself. So the last one should be false because I should be locked out. And indeed, I am. I believe I fixed all the bugs. All right. So that's the program. And again, kind of you might say, okay, like this is just a simulation. So I now want to just save it and actually use it for something. Just one second. Right. So again, I'll just save it. So you don't see here, but it's a collect random login.py. So I'll run it as script the once so that when I save the next file, it's going to be in the same folder. That's just a trick for if I do file save as, it's going to, I believe, try to save in let random. And in here, I'll say import login. And now in the main block, I can just use the login the same way, right? So I'll copy some stuff from over here. Like so. Over here. Use login. So the important thing is that it's in the same folder as the other one. And from here, I can run it. So here I have to say login.login. So the first login is the name of the file. The second login is the name of the function in the file. They happen to be the same. All right. And here it is. Well, it's all false. I can try to log in once as true. And that did not work for some reason. Is that not my password? Let's see why this is false. So in here, so you can switch files as well. So if I step in, I'm now in the login. So here I'll check the username. The username is like this. The password is like this. Usernames, passwords are all here. So yeah. Oh, so yeah. Oh, yeah, because I did not re-import. Thank you. So what I got to do is I got to just, so the thing is it didn't import login again. So the old login attempts were preserved. So if I check login.login attempts right now, they're like this. So to reset, so to re-import login and to rerun everything, I need to actually kind of stop and reinitialize like this. And now the first one is true. So I can also multiply whatever is here. So I can multiply the global variables. So I might, for example, say login.usernames append Irish, and then what's a good password? Authority. So something like that. Am I missing something? Anyone? So why is this broken? So I'm not going to call on the first person who says, let's discuss. So this is the code. And then I'll copy this over as a comment so that it's all on the same screen. And I want people to think about why this is broken. Discuss amongst yourselves. 2 minutes, well, like 2 minutes or something. All right, how many tables figured it out? Pink shirt, yeah, you did too, yes. All right, so, okay, beta 09, you wanna say? Yeah. Yes, that's right. So if you remember, we said that login attempts must correspond to usernames and passwords. So I can't just append to usernames and append to passwords and then not attempt to login attempts, because what's going to happen, let's see. So I'll save. And I'll save. I need to restart again to actually see the effect. So if I try to now log in as Irish, no mantra, so separate issue. So I get an error. So again, shell postmortem. And the problem is this line. So I'll check, okay, to compute the right-hand side, you need the username. The username is Irish, seems okay. I'll check if usernames has Irish in it. Oh, it actually has authority as well. Why did I do that? Oh, it should be passwords, but that's just a typo. Okay, so just to show you that that wasn't the issue, I'll restart and do it again. So postmortem. So same line. So username is Irish, and then usernames are like that. And then this is 3 naturally because Irish is at position 3. And the problem is that I cannot do login attempts at 3 if login attempts only has 0, 1, and 2. Yes. Sorry, I can't hear you. No, and login attempts doesn't know about password, right? So login attempts only is updated if the password directly. All right. What's Discord saying? All right. Something in lecture. Okay, fascinating. So okay, all right. So that's this, and we can fix it. So this is a little bit awkward. So we'll have to say login attempts dot append authority like this. So at this point, I might say, okay, so it's cool that we can do this, but this is awkward, and you have to always remember to append authority. So that's not great design, right? Because you have to remember stuff and Python won't check for you. And it'll just crash if you don't remember to append authority. It'll crash later. It won't just let you know the problem right away. How do you fix it? Well, you can make a function that adds a new person, and the function will make sure to do the boring stuff, which is you could append authority. Really, I meant append 0. Right? So it would be like 0, 0, 0, and then another 0. But let's now make a function that just does it for us so that we don't have to remember that you also have to append another 0 so that login attempts is 0, 0, 0, 0. So, okay. So I'll name it like add user, and that would be username and password. And in here, I'll just do this, but in general, right? So here, so inside login, I don't need to say login dot because I'm inside login.py anyway. And here, I'll say username. And here, I'll say password. And here, I say 0. And because it's a function, I don't have to repeat it every time, right? So now what I can do is I can just say, okay. So this would be add user, and then this would be like Irish And what's another good path? Well, we'll do authority too. Wait, what kind of authorities do you have? Like strong and weak or something?
Big A.
Oh, big A. That's right. Authority like this. Okay. And that does it. Now you can log in as Irish if you know, well, you can try authority with little a and that obviously won't work, but then you can try authority with big A and that works. So again, unfortunately, if you are importing stuff, you need to stop and reset FISO, one of the inconvenient things. So this seems just misspelled. So login attempts is not defined. Well, it would not be defined because it's attempts. So that's like this. Again, stop, redo, run. And this is false, true, true. That's what's supposed to happen. So this is false, this is true, this is true. All right. So, okay, so that was like the purpose of this was to just introduce you to a little bit to the design process, kind of how do you make the code nicer, and also to reinforce this idea of we can have something like what's called the state. So for example, you can keep track of the number of attempts. In addition, we also saw kind of several problem solving techniques. So to recap, we needed to have passwords that corresponds to usernames. And the way we could do it with lists is we could just say, well, username 0 would correspond to password 0, username 1 would correspond to passwords 1, and so on. And the way we looked up, for example, the login attempts that correspond to a particular username is we just looked up the index of the particular username in usernames, and that way we get the corresponding value in login attempts. We also had this very common technique of first checking whether it makes sense to do the computation at all. And then if it doesn't, just doing a shortcut return. So remember, anytime you hit a return, that's the end of the function. So for that reason, you don't have to say like if else. You can just say, well, if it doesn't make sense to do any computation, I'll just return false right away. All right. So, and we again kind of did the import thing and stuff. All right, so that was fun. I wanted, so next Monday, we'll start what's called nested loops. So loops inside loops. Before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about loops in general. So the kind of loops that we had was something like for I in something. And that something could be range, and then if it's range, then I would be, for example, 0, 1, 2, 3. Or if something was a list, then I would be the first element of the list, the second element of the list, and so on. Right. So to recap, you could have something for I in range, whatever, 5, 10, and steps of 2. And range just makes it so that I is 5, and then 7 in this case, and then 9. Right? If you have a list, then you could go through the list with for E and L. So note that here I used E for element, but of course, E is just a name. I could say for I and L as well. It's just that by convention, so by convention, meaning it's not mandatory, it's just nicer to write it that way because it would then be more readable. Indices are I, are J, and stuff like that. So if it's I, if it's J, you know that it's supposed to be something like a number. So I stands for index, or like maybe integer, more likely index. On the other hand, when you're doing for E and L, by saying that this is E, you're kind of suggesting that it's not just necessarily going to be a number. And in fact, E would be like high and then 7 and then 10. So I strongly suggest that you follow this convention rather than doing what I see a lot of people doing, like for I and L, just because that might be confusing to you. So the third way you could go through the list is you could say for I in range length of L, and here I can print L at I. So note that one way of thinking about it is I'm going through the list, but really you could say, well, it's just that I'm saying for I in range length of L, meaning I is 0, then 1, then 2, and so on, up to length of L minus 1. It so happens that this is connected to the list, but Python doesn't care, right? So as far as Python is concerned, it's just that I is 0 and 1 and 2. Blue short up top, you are like talking and not facing me. Blue hoodie and Gamma 06, blue hoodie, you're talking and you're not looking at me. Thank you. All right. So again, I usually kind of like I'm not offended by people talking, and I understand that it's 5 p.m. At the same time, when people are talking very loudly, it's difficult for people to hear. It's also sometimes difficult for me to talk, although not today, and I'm kind of far away from you in this room, so it doesn't affect me, but it affects your peers. So, okay. So for I in range length of L, so as far as Python is concerned, it's just that I is 0, 1, 2. And then if you use it by saying L at I, then it happens that you're putting the first, the second, the third, and so on element of L. Right? So you could also say something like, and you shouldn't, but you can say something like I is equal to 0. And then while I is smaller than length of L, I'll print L at I. And I'll increment I by 1. Increment means increase by 1. Right? So this is kind of the same as this, right? So we're making I 0, and then I is 1, and then I is 2. And every time we're printing L at 0, L at 1, L at 2. When do we stop? Well, we stop when it stops being the case that I is smaller than length of L. So that means that the last I would be length of L minus 1, exactly the same as this. So this is, in this case, not great. One reason is just because there's a lot of housekeeping that you need to do. So you need to remember to say I equals 0. And you also need to manually say I plus equals 1. And in general, you should prefer to avoid while loops. Part of the reason is they're less readable. Another part of the reason is that if you happen to forget to say I plus equals 1, what happens is what's called an infinite loop. So I'll keep this example, but I'll add the infinite loop. So what's going to happen if I run this? L is not defined. Well, that makes sense. So L by L, I mean this. So why is this happening? Well, what's happening is I is equal to 0. And then I'm saying while I is smaller than length of L, so I is smaller than 3, yes, print L at I, print L at 0, that's the print high. And then I go back, is 0 still smaller than 3? Yes, print L at 0. Is 0 smaller than 3? Yes, print L at 0. And this is what happens, is high is printed an infinite number of times. So this is kind of a bug that causes an infinite loop. So to stop, Control I, Command I on a Mac. So forgot to change I, so I will forever be smaller than length of L. So that's an infinite loop. So an easier thing to do to cause an infinite loop is you can just say while true, okay, doesn't mean anything. It could be that like this is like EC and then whatever, right? So you print it. Well, this is actually going to be instructive. So let's say I run this. Of course, the second loop will never run because I'm forever stuck on lines 27, 26, 27. So I'll interrupt this and I'll comment this out. And now it's going to be this. Okay, so that's kind of the same thing, right? So saying while 0 is smaller than 3, while 0 is smaller than 3, well, probably unless like the laws of physics change, or like even if the laws of physics change, 0 is still smaller than 3, like the laws of math will have to change in order for that to stop being true. So it's the same as saying while true. I did not bring a shampoo bottle to class. I usually kind of the usual joke is like, why did the programmer say forever? Well, because the shampoo bottle said lather, rinse, repeat. So that's a kind of an infinite loop. I should say most shampoo bottles, if you check that the cover, do not say that. They in fact say lather, rinse, repeat 50 times. That's not the infinite loop. All right, a few months, bye.
So, I just want to know, how to, deliver the coding back those.
So there's instructions on Piazza. So you put everything. So you put everything in the file coding back
Like
one.py. All the function.
Okay.
Right.
Course.
Okay.
But I'm trying to get, I'm just trying to do research next on there.
All right.
A lot of research is on me being good with data analysis, like on there, not
Sure.
very little of it, but also having a little bit of more machine learning and then applicable. Any advice on how to get good at that? Because I tried Pandas, but I quickly forget all the commands. And reading API documentation.
I mean,
Good at that.
I'm not sure you need to go because like now if you go to get top pilot, like it's all done for you.
Okay.
So I'm not convinced that you actually.
Wait, so about three students?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like if it's pronounced like
Okay. So that's where you're getting going.
yeah, no, go there.
That
Yeah.
was cool about the
Yeah, so, yeah, to be honest, I don't think you need to. With that said, if you do a couple projects, then you'll kind of get the hang of it automatically.
The Titanic project is like a common one for people.
No, I mean, it's not really a project.
There are so many things that.
Well,
Do you have
as,
any idea of the lists that you can find online?
well, I have one that I would suggest. So over here, so like the solutions are also there. Yeah, so if you go like to so this is like my website. So like so predictive modeling, fairness, machine learning early. So we have like we have like a Python version of this.
Sure.
Where do you put it? Yeah, over. I don't know where the Python handout is, to be honest, but it's somewhere there.
I'll just.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I tried that out.
Yeah. So you can try this one. I mean, it's just one project. It's just one. So one thing you could do is if you look for
You know, I can talk to this before, like, talk
Yeah.
with you about this before last
Yeah,
lecture.
yeah.
on the day.
Yeah, so you can do, so if you look at, I'm just, like, the name of the course is escaping, yeah, it is Data 100. So if you do like Data 100, at Berkeley, they, like, that's pretty good.
It's like an online.
I'm not sure it's online, actually, they have everything there, I'm not
Okay.
sure. I'm not sure if it's like literally online, but
Yeah.
it's like very well.
I'll look at that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, okay.
I think you said it yesterday on the.
Yeah, I did. So send me this with the session. Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I'm confused.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'll just answer questions over there. How's it going?
Good, yeah. It's Friday, short week, I guess. there,
Yeah,
we made it.
oh, yeah, well, I mean, like, it was like so eventful for me that they.
Oh, it hasn't feel short,
Yeah, that like, no, I just like forgot
that it's Friday.
what,
finally.
no, I don't even remember what Tuesday was like.
Yeah.
Right, so. Yes, I had like a conference for like actually today and
Today you
yesterday.
had?
Yeah, yes, I just came,
So that's
yeah,
what I said, yeah.
yes, I did, yeah, so the talk is like very stressful.
Yeah, that's a lot of
And then-
cognitive load, especially if you
Yeah,
have to lecture.
Yeah, yeah, and then I have the paper deadline tomorrow at 10 a.m. I guess.
Deadline?
Paper
Oh,
deadline.
okay. Yeah.
Actually, well, so I should submit like revise.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not even counting.